Hey guys, Carlise here. Welcome into the Shadow Box. Again, I am Carlise, your host. I am your grief and trauma coach and your shadow work guide. Today we have with us Liz Quinn. Liz is the host of Healing Hearts podcast. This is a space that's dedicated to sharing stories of love, loss, and hope. She is a youth services librarian, passionate about creating meaningful programs for children, teens, and families. Her journey through grief started when she lost her firstborn daughter, Alivia, and also when she lost both of her parents. And this is what inspired her to start working and supporting others through storytelling and meaningful conversations. Liz now lives in Lynchburg, Virginia, with her husband, Nathan, and their three children. So that's a good array of things that you do, Liz. I love it. Tell me a little bit more about yourself.
So you mentioned being in Lynchburg. We literally just moved here. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and then we were in Wisconsin and then moved to Pittsburgh, and then just recently moved here to Lynchburg, Virginia. So that's a whole new take and getting kind of settled into that. And so you mentioned me being a youth services librarian. I absolutely love being in the library space and creating community for families and people in the community. So I will not be doing that currently. I'm going to be focusing primarily on my family while we're transitioning with the move. But it gives me more opportunity to create more in the grief space, which I'm very excited for. I'm looking forward to continuing the podcast, to hopefully doing a little more writing and getting my story out there and maybe even published and things like that. So, yeah.
I can't wait. I can't wait to read all about it. So, Liz, tell us what brought you into the world of grief. I know that we mentioned Olivia, and that was your baby girl that passed away. But grief didn't start for you right then, did it?
No.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Ultimately, my very first experience with grief was when I was 10 years old. My grandma passed away, which was my mom's mom. So I was very close to her. I was always known as her little nurse. So when my mom would have to go up to take care of her, me being the youngest of my siblings are 10 and 7 years older than me. So I was the tag along. I had to tag along with my mom when she had to do the things when I was little. And so lots of times if we had to come up and take care of my grandma, I came up with her. So I had definitely a very special relationship with my grandma. So when she passed away, as a 10-year-old, I don't really understand what's going on other than, my grandma's here, now she's not, type of situation. So I don't think I really understood what grief meant, especially at that age. But, fast forward, I definitely experienced, grief in that moment, and just kind of navigating what it would look like to no longer be going to see a grandma and things like that. And then the other thing is that, like, originally I mentioned I was from Wisconsin. I was born and raised most of my life in Illinois up until 8th grade. And then we moved to Wisconsin into my grandmother's house. So there's grief and things embedded in that I didn't even realize until, again, you grow older and you start to see, those tendencies and things.
Yeah, you start to see things in retrospect. And I think it's always important for us in the grief community to kind of let people know that grief is a byproduct of loss. And so when you lost your grandmother, that was what you were able to see and kind of understand. Like, she is no longer tangibly here. We are no longer able to talk to her. So that loss in her presence was missing. And then we go into, a little bit more of experiences within life and then start losing more people. And then we're like, oh, this is what I was feeling. And so that grief starts to come up. Those emotions start to come up, which in turn is what grief is composed of, right? So now carry us along your journey when it comes to now fast forward, grandma has passed away. And you said that this really kind of turned your life upside down.
It did, because grandma passed away when I was the beginning of my 7th grade year. And the end of my seventh grade year, we moved to Wisconsin. My mom had grown up in Wisconsin. My dad had grown up in Wisconsin. So I knew that the intention for them to always go back was there. It just kind of happened with my grandma passing away. This house became like the house that she lived in became available, the house my mom grew up in. So it just seemed the right decision. My brother and sister, as I stated, they're 7 and 10 years older than I. So they were already, in college, married, starting to have a family on their own. And I was the kid at home. And so off we went to Wisconsin. And so I started to live in my grandmother's house, which is what I called it for a very long time.
Yeah.
Probably for a good year. It was not my house. It was the house sometimes I called it the house my mom grew up in. Sometimes I call it my grandmother's house. It took a while for it to feel like home.
Why would you say that you had such a disconnect to it?
Because it was the place that I went to visit her. It's the place that where I took care of her, it was her home.
Yeah.
When we came to visit her, it's where we went, it's where we stayed. So it's definitely a part of me, and I know that, but it took a while for me to realize that it's now my home.
Yeah. That's
So,
interesting. And that was a lot of change for you so fast and
mhm,
so early.
yes.
And so you are not only losing grandmother, then you're changing your locations and then you're changing homes. So as you were growing up during that time, how did you navigate that change? So much change at one time.
Honestly, in the moment, I think you just do the things because that's kind of what you're kind of told to do, especially as a child.
Yeah.
Your family's moving you. Um, I know when I started school in Wisconsin, those first few days into weeks, I faked sick. So that was kind of a way for me I mean, now I know that was a way of me kind of expressing myself and being, unhappy. My mom knew I was faking sick, so she let me stay home. So I think, I definitely think she recognized that I was going through something. Eventually, like grief and loss, you find the joy in the situation. And so I did. I started to make friends, and I started to be able to build community around myself. And like eventually, Wisconsin and my grandmother's house became my home.
Yeah.
It definitely, it's where, once we entered high school, we lived right up the street from the high school. So it was the place that all the kids and all my friends hung out before a football game, before a baseball game, or a basketball game. And we just walk down and be able to go. So, I mean, it turned into a beautiful, beautiful thing.
I love
Um,
that.
but in the very beginning, I didn't see that beautiful thing. All
Yeah.
you see is that heartache and that I have no friends, and this is where grandma lived. How can I live in grandma's house? you
Yeah.
know but like I said, as time and space and yourself evolve, so does your grief and your loss and your capacity to let other things in.
Yeah. And I love how you say how to when you let yourself evolve because you were going through this identity shift.
Yeah.
And so grandma's gone again. And again, grandma is really the core of this right now in this story. And it's like I was her little nurse. And then I was, so there was so much identity that you had linked to grandmother. And then you are changing places, you are going to a new school, you're making new friends, you're young, and so all of these identity things are happening within you. And you had to, like you said, let yourself just kind of come into it, and that's how your identity began to shape itself in that time. And so
Right.
getting to know yourself like all over again, right?
Mhm.
that that's hard as a child.
Yeah. And honestly, I didn't even realize it until, again, years later,
Yeah.
that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
In the
I'm
moment, you're just doing it.
right, because that's what
But
you're
when you
supposed
look
to do.
back and you think about it, you can see where, those shifts and those changes really shaped part of who I am even now today.
Yeah. And I know we're going to dive a lot more into that later on down in the story. So go ahead and tell us, you had more of a personal close loss. Go ahead and take us down that journey of when it really just hit very, very close to home for you?
Oh, so just my personal loss? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I obviously lost my grandma when I was 10, went through high school, met my husband, now husband, my senior year of high school. We were together. We intended to get married, all of the things. Life was going really well. We got married, and within 3 months of getting married, we got pregnant. Was not the intention. Obviously, we intended to be married longer. My husband was still in school and college. He was in the Navy before that, so he went to college after, and so, but became pregnant with our firstborn daughter, Alivia, and my pregnancy was as normal as it can be. I mean, I had gestational diabetes, but I was able to control it with diet and everything. And so our daughter was due July 2008, and she came pretty much right on schedule. I went in for a routine 40-week checkup on July 22nd. And then my doctor is like, "You're starting." She's like, "Go home and walk. Move, move, move." And so that's what we did. And July 23rd, the evening of July 22nd, I was admitted to the hospital and labor was on its way. And then um, and July 23rd, our beautiful little girl, Alivia Agnes Quinn, was born with a slight heartbeat, but not breathing. And so she was immediately whisked away to the NICU, where my husband went and to be with her. And because I did deliver vaginally, I still had some things to do before I could even see her or get any more details. And so although, in that very beginning moment, we didn't know a whole lot other than she was gone and whisked away to the NICU. I don't think I truly knew, you know, how devastating all of this was going to end up until it
Yeah.
just happened. But Olivia lived for 34 hours in the NICU until finally she was on a breathing tube, and the breathing tube had gone into her esophagus. And we could have either re-intubated or just, this was her way of saying goodbye. And at this point, we had already been kind of told that, like, we're only keeping her alive for you, for family and friends to say their goodbyes and things like that. Like, there was nothing left they could do. And so we took her off of her vent, and she died she lived on her own without a breathing tube for about 8 minutes and took her last breath in my husband's arms. So,
Okay. Yeah. And how unselfish is that of you to not say, I'm going to prolong this for a few more days or a few more hours or what have you? That was really a selfless thing for you to do, considering that that she was suffering in a sense.
yeah.
And a lot of parents would say, I think a lot of parents would go the duration, just to
Yeah.
spend that time. But for you, that's when you were automatically mom.
Yeah.
We put
Yeah.
our children before we put ourselves, and you
Yeah.
did that right in the moment, and that was your first baby, and that was the hardest decision that you'll probably ever have to make in life, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I think for us, we took that as a sign from her, as like I love you, but it's time. Like,
Yeah,
it's okay. I'm going to be okay.
yeah,
In that moment, I don't think I actually think it was like a sign from her. I think it was more of like the doctors gave us, like, we can reintubate, but it's not, it was more factual than anything else. And
yeah,
ultimately, I didn't want her to suffer anymore. And we had 34 hours. Like, we were able to love her and hold her and baptize her, do all the things that, you know, as much as you can in that situation, you know.
yeah. You even baptized her. And everyone, let me tell you, Olivia's name is not just spelled regular. It is Alivia, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, that is a beautiful way to spell her name. and you baptized her. How precious was that moment? Like that's priceless.
Yeah, it was beautiful. The one thing that's really cool about our situation is that there's a program called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, and it is volunteer um, photographers that are willing to come in and take pictures of you in these situations, you
Yeah.
know. And our photographer was originally supposed to come at a certain time, and she's like, something came up. Can I come now? And we're like, sure. So she came and she took professional pictures of not only the baptism, but she was also there for when the tube went into her esophagus. So we have professional pictures of not only of Alivia on a breathing tube and in her beautiful white dress, but also without tubes and things like that because she was there in that exact moment.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Tell me, there's ways that you guys keep Olivia integrated within your
Mhm.
life. And when you were
Yeah.
telling me this initially, I was amazed again, like you just amazed me, okay? But
Oh,
I
thank
was amazed again because this is not a situation where it's like, sister is gone or daughter is gone and we're just suffering that loss. You guys make sure that she is a part of you every day, every holiday, whatever you can do, she's there. What tell
Yeah. Yeah. So, Olivia's my daughter. She's not going, that's not changing. She made me a mother. And so we have gone on to have three beautiful children. And they know all about her sister, their sister. She is a part of who we are. She's woven into the fabric who we are as a family. She is the oldest. They all know she's the oldest. And we do that in a variety of ways. Not only do we just talk about her as part of our life, but one of the very first things we did, that very first Christmas after we lost Olivia, um, obviously we were about 5 months in, and of course, I don't really want to celebrate. I'm supposed to have a 5 month old daughter, bouncing and loving, loving the Christmas lights and oohing and eyeing and smiling and cooing and but so we weren't going to really celebrate. We weren't going to have a Christmas tree. We weren't going to do any of those things. But sometimes moms know a little more and a little better than we do. And so we were with my parents at their house, probably just a little bit sometime in December. And my mom knew that I wasn't going to get a tree and all the things. And so growing up, my mom used to have a 6 foot tree lit up with white lights that she put teddy bears on. She called it the teddy bear tree. And so she decided when we were leaving and packing up the car, she brought up her 6 foot tree and her lights and all the things that she put on her teddy bear tree, minus the teddy bears, and just stuck it in my car. And she said, just in case. This way you have one. If you just decide you want to put one up, you have one. And I remember rolling my eyes. I remember being like, seriously, mom, I don't want to do this. But at the
Yeah,
same time, you're also a daughter who wants to humor and just do, make sure that they're okay.
yeah,
So, and it was probably a couple days later that it felt weird with no Christmas things in the house. Christmas is one of my favorite holidays. And so I did. I decided to set up that tree. Decided to set up Olivia's, well, we call it Olivia's tree now. But at the time, it was just the tree we put up and it had beautiful white lights. And my mom used to put this like crystal white garland on the teddy bear tree. And so I had it all set up and it needed ornaments. And so the very next day, me and my husband went to as many stores as we could find and found butterflies and angels and anything that, gave us an inkling of representing Olivia. And we put it on the tree. And then that year we asked for ornaments for Christmas for her tree. And we since then have created this beautiful Olivia's angel tree and we decorate it every year. We pick a new ornament as a family every year.
yeah.
It's probably one of our favorite activities to do as a family in the holidays is to decorate Olivia's angel tree. It's usually the first tree that goes up just before Thanksgiving, and it usually stays up until February. So, yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the biggest traditions we've created around our daughter. But ultimately, she's just part of us. You know, her photo is on our photo wall. So, I mean, she's just, I mean, her sister, Zoe, is 2 years younger than she is.
Yeah,
She writes letters to her as if she was here,
I love
because I
that.
know that she's kind of like in that space of like she should have a 16-year-old sister helping her navigate teenage life.
Yeah,
Um, Grayson, he's very curious and very blunt. So he asks us all the really hard questions when it comes to Alivia.
yeah,
So why'd she die? What happened? So we sometimes have to go into, a little bit of detail, but not as much as you want. And then Logan is still young, so he's in first grade, and so he just adores having an older sister that's in heaven, and draws angels of her. And that's the one thing I think is most beautiful is that I never forced my kids to include Alivia in their pictures and things. It was just you have a sister, and if they wanted to, but every time, in kindergarten, they always have to draw their family, and every child of mine has always drawn Alivia in the heavens. They've always had her up in the thing, and then when you have to stand up in front of the class and tell who's in your family, they always say, "This is my sister Alivia," and there's always questions. I remember the very first time I got an email from Zoe's teacher, and it was just, you know, she was like, "Oh my gosh," and I'm like, "It's just part of who she is. That's just she's just there."
yeah, and nothing is swept under the rug. I mean,
Mm-mm.
everything is there, and it's because she does exist.
Mm-hmm.
She's not just a memory. She's not just, a hospital case, things of that nature. And I think that, well, I won't say I think, I will ask you, with that being said, does it make it easier when you integrate her and keep her alive every day in your way, versus how another person may do it and just kind of, she's gone, we're going to put her here and
Honestly, in this specific incident, it's whatever's going to work best for you in
yeah,
that situation. Of course, for me, it's easier. I can't imagine just folding everything up and putting it in a box and only taking it out when I think of her.
yeah,
But I know other people, that's what they might need to do,
yeah,
and so they do it. So, yes, it's been absolutely easier for me to be able to have her part of my life. But I went into this knowing that she made me a mother. She taught me things that only she could have taught me. And so I want to be able to share that not only with others, but my children,
yeah,
especially. I
yeah.
think she's teaching them in ways that I never expected as well.
Yeah. And also, a lot of people have the issue of, how do I build a relationship with my lost loved one? Because it's not where it used to be. They're no longer here. I can't do the normal things that I would usually do. So how does this relationship look now? And I think that what you've done and how you've integrated her is a perfect example of how you can refurbish a relationship with a lost loved one. That's a perfect example of doing that. And like you said, it works for you. It works for your family. And a lot of others, and I love how you said that, whatever works for you, because it's not a cookie cutter ordeal, right? And so, some people have different ways that they deal with the depths of their grief, and that's why we have to leave them room to do whatever works for them. So I love that you said that. Now, Nathan, your
Mm-hmm.
husband,
Yes.
he kind of, he's been at the forefront of a lot of
Yes.
this,
Yes.
from birth to taking her to the NICU, going there to the NICU with her, last breath. So how has he kind of navigated his grief, and how have you noticed that you guys grieve differently?
Nathan's quiet. He's always been quiet, and he's quiet in his grief as well. He definitely, he got, like you said, he had the forefront. He got the brunt of loss. I'm on this end and he's on the front end. He saw so much more, and I don't even know all the details because it's traumatic for him to share and talk about. He does share a little bit of it in a podcast episode that he did on Healing Hearts podcast for Bereavement's Father's Day. It's very brief because, again, it's traumatic, and things. But we did grieve very differently. I grieved very open, very vocal, about how much I missed her and how much, she meant to me and things like that. And my husband, still being in college, poured himself into school. He actually had the best semester of his life after Olivia died.
Wow.
Yeah, it still blows my mind. And I remember at one point thinking that he didn't miss her, that she was just an afterthought because of just how much he really just poured himself into work.
Yeah.
I know now that that was part of his grieving process. He has shared that he would be up late. He's a nuclear engineer, so he's all math, and so he'd be up late doing his mathematical equations, and he would say there was tears while he was doing them because in a way he was processing his grief through his mathematics, and
Yeah.
so um, and still to this day, we still grieve very differently. I mean, we're definitely a lot more open. He's more open than he used to be, just because we're 16 years since she passed. She is openly shared with our family.
Yeah.
So he has to be a little more, like I said, we have a very curious young boy, Grayson, who asks us all the questions about all the things, including his sister. And so we are not one to sugarcoat what happened. We try to be and answer the questions as much as we can in his language that he can understand.
Yeah.
But we want them to understand and to know, because in their sense, that's their way of grieving their sister they never knew.
Yeah. I wonder when Grayson asks the questions and you guys are in the home or, because like you said, he's a outspoken one, right? So you
Yes.
guys could be in the grocery store and he
Oh, yeah.
asks you a question.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he does that, does it put you guys in a space, in a somber space, or it does?
Sometimes I think it depends on where we are or what we're talking about, because Grayson can just randomly come up with it. It can just be we're in the middle of watching TV and Olivia's on his brain, and so he'll ask, why did Olivia have to this, or can you tell me what happened with Olivia's vent again? Like he knows the story, but sometimes he just needs, a little more detail.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it can catch us off guard, and sometimes it can just put us in that, like, yeah, we, we're without her, and he's, it's just a reminder.
Yeah.
Not a bad thing at all, just something that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And that's really interesting with Grayson because the loss of Olivia has shaped everyone's shadow now.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So when we think about that, Grayson is asking these questions and vent questions, and we don't know where this is going to propel him into his purpose and into his future.
right.
And so he could be asking questions because, I don't know, maybe he wants to be a doctor one day, or maybe he's going to be, he's going to be involved in some area of healthcare or bereavement or anything of that nature. So it's his curiosity is going, and that's when most times, and we don't think about it until retrospect, like, oh, little Grayson has become an anesthesiologist, or he's become and it's like, oh, that's why he used to ask the questions about trachs,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
so I love that he's curious, and I love that you guys give him the space to ask the questions and be open about it. um, so I know you said sometimes you guys go into that somber place. Would you say that that's most of the time, or is it so normal now where it's like, we're just going to answer the question and we're just going to keep going?
it's pretty normal now. We're
Yeah.
pretty good about just answering his questions, and just kind of keep going and having a conversation. Sometimes it continues on more about Olivia, and sometimes it can continue on more just about other deaths, because, not only have, and you mentioned it in the beginning, not only have my children experienced the death of their sister, but they've also experienced the death of their grandparents. And so it
Yeah.
can snowball into even more of that. Grayson's very curious about all things. And sometimes one question about Olivia leads to a whole nother conversation about loss and death. And
Mhm.
again, we are just as open and share as much as we can. And sometimes if it gets to be too much, we will have to sometimes, like, pause and put like a pin in it and be like, we all need a minute,
Yeah.
because sometimes, as curious as he is, it's a very hard topic to discuss.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we do just need to take a minute. And even he may not even realize he needs the minute, but he does too.
Yeah.
He needs to take a minute to breathe and accept all of the information that he's been given.
Yeah, I'm going to send you some information, and you may already know her, but I am going to send you some information. It's a lady who curates books or literature information for children who have questions about death and have like all of these different scenarios that kind of go on about loss and
Mm-hmm.
grief. And I think that that would be a really good resource for him because he's super curious.
Yes. Oh, yes. He's curious about everything.
Yeah, super
Yes.
curious.
Yes.
So, I mean, even those hard times where you don't want to answer the question, let's just be real
Yeah.
about it, right?
Oh, for
When you
sure.
don't want to
Absolutely.
answer the question, it's like, here, I have a book for you, you know?
Yeah.
Then let me
Yeah,
know if
that'd
you
be
have
great.
any
I
questions.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Now, let's go ahead and move into that next scenario, though, of your parents.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about that.
I've lost both my parents, my mom and my dad, 2 years apart of each other. I lost my dad first in 2018. Um, he got diagnosed with esophagus cancer. Um, um, Funny story is his first cancer treatment was the day that my youngest was born.
Wow.
Yeah. So December 27th. Uh, and uh, uh, I lost my train of thought. And so my dad, obviously, he went through treatment. He went through chemo and all of the things. And surprisingly, he did really well. He had stage 4 cancer, so they were very unsure how successful chemo would be and things like that. And it turned out that he seemed to be pretty successful. A little backstory to that is that my mom had Alzheimer's, so she was in a nursing home at the time. So he was living by himself. Um, uh, and he finished his chemo in March and went right back to work, which is very odd and unusual. But he went right back to work at the grocery store where he stocked shelves and did all the things. And it wasn't until I'd say like June of that 2018 he started to have what they called delay reaction to chemo.
Okay.
And so a lot of the things that usually happen pretty early on happened later. Loss of appetite, being tired, things like that.
Hmm.
He started showing those symptoms. So he took an absence from work. We go down to Wisconsin every year to visit. And so we were going in that July. We went that July to see my dad. My dad's a prideful man, so he would only give you so much information, not the whole truth.
Yeah.
So I thought I knew he was not well. I knew he was sick and I knew he was taking an absence from work, but I thought he was still functional. I was wrong.
Yeah.
Because when I walked into the house, it was a disaster. It smelled of urine. It was a disaster. My dad was in the bed. You could tell that he'd probably been there most of the day, and had not barely moved. And so we spent the next 2 weeks while we were there visiting in and out of doctors and making sure to get him into a nursing home so I could return to Pittsburgh, where we lived at the time. And he could not be alone. That was the one big thing. Like every doctor kept telling me, "What do you need?" I'm like, he can't be at home. He can't be alone. And my sister lived in South Carolina. My brother lived in Chicago. I lived in Pittsburgh. We were all throughout, and had kids and families. Like we couldn't drop everything to come take care of him in this situation. And so he was placed, fortunately, in the same nursing home as my mom. So they
Okay.
were together. And I left at the end of July to go back to Wisconsin with intentions to return in a few months to, check on him and be whatever. My brother and sister at that point were making plans to come and see him as well. So we we thought we knew time was coming, like ending, just we didn't think it would be as fast as it did. And a week
Right.
later, my dad died. in August of 2018, a week after I left to the day. I left on a Tuesday. The following Tuesday, he passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And definitely was not, like I said, it was on our radar that he was definitely like at his end. We just didn't think it would be that fast. Um,
Right.
had I known it'd be that fast, I would have definitely told my brother and sister to get on a plane
Yeah.
immediately, because they did not get to have any type of closure or goodbye to my dad. So
Yeah, that's tough. Did your mom know that dad was there? Was she able to come in and out a little bit?
yes, I do. Yes, she did. At that point, she did. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2016. And she'd been in the nursing home for about a year at that point. And so her short term memory was what was the hardest. She didn't have a great short term memory, but long term memory was wonderful. So she knew that who dad was, for the whole time. Whatever. So, I mean, that's what also made it difficult when he did pass. Being at the same nursing home and then knowing that um, since he was gone, there were times that because her short term memory was so short, that she did still think he was coming to visit, and things like that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And so take a breath because that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot. And we get so used to telling our story that even when we're used to telling it, like it sinks in differently every time we tell it
yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, it does. It really does. I think the more I tell it, especially my dad's side, the more I feel bad for my brother and sister that they didn't get an opportunity, because, and I feel guilty in that, and I know I shouldn't. I know that none of it was my fault. Like,
Right?
I didn't know he would die a week later. I gave them, you know, I don't know when, but I don't think it's going to be next week. Like that was definitely, I don't think I used those exact words, but it was definitely like, think about coming, but it wasn't like, think about coming now. And so sometimes I wish I had, but I didn't know, like I didn't think he would deteriorate that quickly. Um,
Yeah. And well, and like you said, you know that you shouldn't. So that's where you give
right.
yourself grace
Mm-hmm.
not to feel like that. You know,
Right.
you're only one person and you just had a baby and you have a family and you're trying to navigate, all of these things. So, why how you gave the information according to what you knew
Yeah.
and, everyone else had the information that you had
Right.
and knew what they knew as well. So, that's where you kind of let everyone be accountable and responsible for themselves.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely. I understand that.
yeah. So with that, I know that I had asked you because when you lose your parents, you lose a sense of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't even, well, no, let's continue because you also lost mom. So how
2 years
long
later, I
after
lost my mom. Yeah, 2 years later, I lost my mom. And like I said, my mom had Alzheimer's, and she was in the nursing home. Ultimately, Alzheimer's is what took her life. She eventually just stopped eating, and just started to kind of, no longer. I think she just knew it was time to go. Ultimately, and the nurses had given us phone calls beforehand. My brother, sister, and I, of like, we don't know how long it's going to happen, but we can tell you that she's eating less and less. She is showing more of that like purpley color of like when she's losing, you know,
oxygen?
yeah, exactly,
Hmm.
exactly, and things like that. And so she's like, we can't give you a time frame because sometimes it can be like one day, and sometimes it can be 3 months. Like it really can drag out. And so we made plans. My brother and my sister and I all made plans to go the following week, just because like flights and stuff like that is obviously cheaper if you can wait a little while. My brother lives the closest. He lives in Chicago, so he's about 4 hours away from the Wisconsin area that my parents were in. And so he decided to go a day early to visit, and go see her. He went up on a Saturday, and that Saturday afternoon, he called me and my sister, and he says, "You guys should probably come earlier." And so my sister and I were on a plane the next day. That Sunday we were on a plane and we got to my mom, and um, we it was the middle of COVID, so it was 2020, August of 2020.
Wow.
Um, uh, visiting nursing homes are pretty only if your loved one's on their deathbed,
Yeah,
honestly, and things like that. We were told we shouldn't touch her, we can't hug her, all the things. We broke all the rules
of course.
because ultimately, like, I mean, she's dying. Like, who cares?
Yeah,
And so, but it was beautiful. I mean, as hard as losing my mom was, the way she passed was, I think, the way she needed to pass. She got to see all of her kids one last time. There was a moment when my sister and I went to hug my mom. She, like, at this point, she's very stiff and very, very much couldn't move.
yeah,
Um, she jerked just a tiny bit, like she was hugging back. And if you know my mom, she was this amazing hugger. She had monkey arms; they were longer than whatever, and she could hug your whole body and squeeze. So it was just, you know, it truly was very different than my dad. How
yeah,
brief, how sudden and drastic that was. Where my mom's was, as hard as it was peaceful, and
yeah.
we were able to, have a real moment with her.
Yeah, and say those goodbyes. And even if it's in silence or even if it's just in presence, that is a lot because you miss the void of not being able to do those things, not being able to see her as your brother and sister had with your dad. So that was really good that they were
Mhm.
able to at least get that with mom,
Yeah,
so that they could kind of start to fill a little bit of that void. And
right.
because we don't know that, the guilt that they felt,
Very
you
true.
know,
Mhm.
and just, how they were processing everything being so
Right.
far away. And, so I can only imagine the strength and the stability even that you three gave each other, just
Hmm.
being there in that moment with mom. And then a proud moment for mom, of course, because she has all her three babies there. And, she's not alone,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, not alone. So when we think about the losses that you have had, and we have mom and dad, which is they were your parents and they gave you your identity. They raised you, right? And then we have Olivia that passed away. Would you say that the death of Olivia kind of softened the blow of the death of mom and dad? Or was
Pieces of
it
it. I
okay?
would say pieces of it. They're two different types of losses.
Hmm.
So I think that plays into it. But because I'd already experienced such extreme loss and grief, obviously the loss of my parents was a little, it didn't feel as heavy, but it also felt just as heavy because I lost my parents.
Yeah,
My identity, a lot of my identity, I realized, was wrapped up in my parents.
yeah,
Didn't realize that until after they passed. But I was very close to my mom. And so I'd already been starting to grieve her, obviously, with the Alzheimer's and things like that. And then years after getting married and losing Olivia, my relationship with my dad got a lot closer. So losing them both was just, devastating. I became numb in a sense. I had kids to take care of, and I don't remember getting from point A to point B, but somehow I did it.
yeah,
Um, you pick up the pieces and do it. But you were to ask me if, how my kids got on the bus, to the point of also if they were in some type of after school activity, and I did that. I don't remember the day to day. You
yeah.
know,
You were just on auto.
just yeah, I was just on autopilot, and I don't
Yeah.
remember that day to day type of behavior. I do remember being very grateful for my husband for picking up the pieces where I
Mhm.
didn't. I barely cooked, I barely did any dishes or laundry. He took a lot of that responsibility because I just was not in a space to function.
Yeah. And let's go ahead and bring Nathan in here with this too, even more, because again, he was at the forefront, then he's in the middle, and then he's at the back. He's the observer, and he's seeing you go through all of this. And you thought that, you were on autopilot, but you thought that you're functioning. As long as you can get up day to day or do what you need to do, hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
But Nathan's seen a different part of that. Tell me about that.
I think Nathan saw me in pieces. Uh, and I'd say that like the difference between losing my firstborn daughter and then losing my parents is losing my parents, I had a house and a family to take care of. And
Mhm.
losing my daughter, it was just me and Nate.
Yeah,
And I could lounge and stay on the couch and not have to function because it was just me and Nate was at school. At home, I couldn't do that. I mean, when my dad died, I had a 9-month-old. Like
yeah,
I had a baby at home to take care of, and two kids on their way to school. So Nathan, I think, just kind of he saw a broken Liz. He saw his wife broken, um, and he did the best he could, which is just pick up the pieces that he knew he could pick up, which
yeah,
is the laundry, the dishes, and things like that, and gave me space, as much space as I could have,
yeah,
in that sense. So
yeah. And after your father died, or was it after mom died, or both? That's when he really seen a difference in you, and he was able to kind of like, I forgot how you put it, but he said, I believe that after your father died, that's when he seen you the most broken.
yes, yes, you are correct. I always thought I was more broken after my mom,
Yeah,
um, because that's just kind of like my mom being my mom. She was a really big anchor in my family, in my life. But Nathan always said that I was actually more broken after my dad. And when my mom died, yes, it hit and it was hard and devastating for myself, but I took that loss and used it, and
okay.
built more out of it than with my dad. I I'm not sure completely, other than he's partly right because I did start to focus on myself more, and realize that like I didn't want to be in the broken space I was after losing my dad. I didn't want to go back because I
Yeah,
know what that was like, and I was just starting to come out of it when my mom died. And
yeah,
so when my mom died, I'm sure that he and I both were terrified how far I'd go down,
yeah,
again. And um, I know I did fall a little, but because I was taking those steps and those slowly to build yourself up, to get
hmm,
yourself out of the hole,
yeah,
I never was able to fall down all the way. You can take two steps forward and fall down, but you're always building back up. And so that's
yeah,
kind of what happened. And
yeah,
so Nathan was definitely able to see the difference in how I grieved, um, my parents, their
yeah.
death.
And we talked about that a little bit too, because was it once mom died, or was it once dad died, that you really went full blown into your health, like
My mom.
your
After my
mom?
mom died, I went into full blown to my health. My mom died in August of 2020. In January of 2021, I started my health journey. Love.
Yeah, yeah. And how we talked about that was a lot of distraction. I mean, you
Mhm.
had a lot of loss that was going and going and going and going, and you didn't have time to really breathe. And even with Olivia, it was more so like you survived it, but you
Mhm.
kept kind of going with it. And then you were kind of hit some more. So it was like, this is too much for
Yeah.
my brain and for my
Yeah.
body to really comprehend. So let me go and get this energy out of me. Let me go exercise it out. Let me go do something that would kind of take my mind off of it a little bit, to get the frustration out, right? So when we talk about that, and we're going to go into identity as well, what did losing your parents really expose in you?
Honestly, it made me feel little again. Um, like not necessarily little. That's not the right word. I felt lost because I didn't have them to look to. I had this beautiful family that I loved and adored, but then the pieces of me that made me part of who I am, they were gone. And so I didn't know where to go and what to do. And like you said, I dove myself into health as a distraction. But as I dove into health, I was able to peel layers of me that my parents carried that now were a part of me.
Okay. Do tell.
So just like just the idea of that, like, you know, my parts of my dad that I carried with me, not always good parts, I was able to peel off. My dad was a very, like I said, he was a prideful man, but he was also, he was one of those that when he got mad, he got fast and furious and then let it go. You know, so if you do something, he'd get angry and yell at you, but then I would get into tears, and then 5 minutes later, we were fine because he got it all off his chest, but
Yeah.
I did not, you know? And so I realized that I didn't want that part of him. You know, I love him, but I didn't want that part of him on me.
Yeah.
So it changed my relationship with him, but also with my kids, because now I'm not giving that.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what grief exposed me to is that word, that generational trauma that
Yeah.
you hear. I think that's, for me, that's what grief exposed the most of.
Yeah.
Um, I've known of it, but I think when you dive into grief and that relationship that you have with your family, you start to, threads start to come undone, and there's good threads, there's bad threads, there's all, you know. And for me, I was able to start to peel pieces of those threads that I didn't want to, like, they were a part of me, but they don't need to be part of the rest of my story, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
It totally makes sense, and that goes along that shadow work journey right there. Because when we think about that, that is that there was that conditioning, there was that aspect of this part of you being normal, and
Right.
so it was normal because you had always seen it, you absorbed it. And when your parents passed away, here we go talking about your identity, you were able to say, wait, who am I now? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not their daughter. I am their daughter, but they're not here anymore. Some of these things that have been on me, I don't have to hold on to anymore. And it's
Right.
okay for me to shed and release it. And that trauma, the generational trauma, the things that you had learned, you were saying, maybe this is not really a part of me. Maybe this is just a part that I picked up along the way and thought that this is how I should do it. But losing your parents gave you the space to really find yourself. And that's what loss does. That's what grieving does.
Mm-hmm.
Because you probably found yourself in that space after they passed away of being angry or being just impulsive a little bit. And it's like, oh, now I get to feel this at a deeper level, and I get to feel bad about it at a deeper level, to know I know where this is coming from,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it's not
Exactly.
necessarily me, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, that's why I say grief really, it exposes everything out of you, and it makes you come into your authenticity of saying, what who am I now? Who have I always been? Because your parents only raise you the way that they know,
Right.
and then once they're no longer here, or once you venture out on your own and get to know yourself, then it's just like, oh, I am my own little person in here, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And what would you say that one of the things losing your mom exposed out of you?
My love for writing,
Okay.
honestly, as that's um, after after my dad passed and going through all of their stuff. My mom was a big writer. I didn't realize she was such a writer, but we have so many of the things that she written, and I would say um, just the art of, my mom exposed me to new passions, I would say, is the best way to describe it, because her loss is what drove me to better myself, health wise, wellness wise. Um, And by doing so, I was able to dive into more grief support and dive into being a grief advocate and creating the Healing Hearts podcast and wanting to share and be more storytelling. And there's power in sharing our stories. And she exposed a lot of that in me. And I learned more about how much she enjoyed writing as well. And as I've gone and looked at some of her things in the last few years. So I'd say that like grieving her just exposed me into wanting to be a better person, because I know that in reality, I know that she had regrets in life, and I don't want to feel regretful in my life. So
Yeah. How close would you say that you are to your authentic core, or to not having those regrets in your life?
it's a work in progress as always. But I'm definitely better than I was 6 months ago, even. I mean, you just continue to, grow and adapt and evolve. I mean, that's the whole point of life. Um,
Yeah.
I do know that I don't want to say unfortunately, because in a sense, there's universalness in that we're all going to pass away. We're all
Hmm.
going to die. So I hate to use the word unfortunately, but in reality, I'm not sure. Like you said, grief opens you up. It
Yeah.
cracks you open. And
Yeah.
if you don't experience loss in some way, and that doesn't have to be the death of someone, it can be, it can be moving. It can be something as easy as something like that. That's what's going to, like you said, bring you to your core.
Yeah.
If I hadn't lost my parents, I'm not sure I would be where I am today and who I am today.
Yeah.
I think I maybe get there eventually, but I'm grateful that I'm there now at 42 years old and not 62.
Yeah.
Would I love to have 20 more years with my parents? Yeah. But at the same time, to think about who I was in those 20 years, it's such a double-edged sword, because you
Yeah.
grow so much. Um, I literally was just editing a podcast before we started, and the my guest said, there's like a rebirth in grief. And it's so true,
Yeah.
And so, like, the rebirth of myself after losing my parents, to think that I could miss out on that 20 years, you know what I mean? It's so hard, because, of course, I want more 20 years with my parents. But at the same time, who I am now, I'm enjoying who I am.
Yeah. And that was my next question too. Have you learned to embrace who you are as you're getting to know yourself all over again, as you're
Yes.
getting to build your
Mhm.
identity?
Yeah. I mean, again, it ebbs and flows. You're going to have better moments or not. This transition to moving from Pittsburgh to Lynchburg has been a challenge. And so it's definitely just been another layer in my grief journey,
Yeah.
that I'm learning to embrace and grow with. But I think, again, it's another thing grief teaches you. It just teaches you. There's so many lessons in grief. It's
Yeah.
crazy. you
It
know.
is. And the biggest lesson that we learn is how to love ourselves. The
Yes.
biggest lesson that we learn is how to accept ourselves.
Yep.
And really, grief will always propel you if you do the work, if you really take it for what it is. And taking it for what it is can be a death defying moment.
Mm-hmm.
It could
Oh yeah.
be, it's those gut crunching moments, but you take it for what it is and you let it unfold what has already kind of been naturally there for you.
Right.
And so once we do that, it's like, okay, now I can identify with myself better. I can hold myself better accountable. I can be more responsible for self. I could be more responsible for those who are crossing my path. I could be more responsible for my children and for my husband. It's just overall the ability to show up.
Right.
Now you can show up and you
Yep.
know who you're supposed to show up as,
Yes. Yeah.
you know. Um, Awesome. I love it. I love it. So if I were to ask you today, Liz, from back then when you started to experience grief to where you are right now, who are you?
That's a really good question. um, I am someone that loves hard, someone that appreciates life, someone that is passionate about sharing how grief is changes you, develops you, evolves you, how grief is not a taboo subject, how it is something that needs to be expressed and shared and enjoyed, as odd as that may be. Um, I am a proud wife and mom of four, and I wear that badge of motherhood so deeply, and so grateful for all of my children. But, again, motherhood for me started in grief. And so I think I take gratitude differently because grief and gratitude go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Um, I just, honestly, I'm enjoying finding out who I am.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's majority of what it is that, like, I'm someone that's always understands that now I'm growing and I'm always going to grow and I'm always going to evolve. And it's okay. And sometimes that evolving is going to be rocky and hard, because I can tell you now that, like, in the midst of this move, I feel a little disconstructed and lost just because we moved from Pittsburgh, where we lived for 12 years, to a whole new city with no one.
Yeah.
So, like, it's just another layer that I have to discover who I am again in this
Yeah.
arena.
Yeah. And it feels familiar to you again.
Yes, it
And
very
that's
much does.
yeah, and that's where that trigger kind of comes in because
Mm-hmm.
you're like, I've been in this place before, as foreign as it is, because it's a new city, a new
Right,
state, what have you. It's like I've been here before, though,
right.
you know. And that's where I asked you, who are you? And I'm glad that I did because that's what you need to hold on to while you're in this
Mm-hmm.
transition. You know, who have you grown to be? And all of this being into this is just another notch in my belt, another
Mm-hmm.
level, another learning experience,
Yeah,
of me getting to know a little bit more about myself,
yeah.
you know, a little bit more about my journey. And so, you know, I want you to extend grace to yourself, you know, and allow yourself to be in the space that you're in. um, but always remember, like, oh, I'm learning something. This is a
Mm-hmm.
learning tool,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Awesome. So Liz, tell us, is there anything coming down the pipeline for you, anything we should be looking forward to seeing from you?
Well, continuing with the Healing Hearts podcast,
Okay.
we will be wrapping up season 2 in March, and then season 3 will probably start probably July of this year. Hopefully, fingers crossed, more writing. My goal is to just try to write for other places and in magazines and things like that. Writing has been on my heart lately, so I think that's, look for my name that way. I do have thoughts of a book that I'd like to do, but I still have to put, feelers out for that and stuff like that. But it would be the book that I'm thinking about would be along the same lines as, like, the Healing Hearts podcast, where others could share their story and stuff. It wouldn't just
Okay.
be my story. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing it and reading it and watching it all unfold.
No, thank you so much.
Definitely. Liz podcast information will be up under, well, within her bio, up under the podcast, and you will be able to listen to her. And her guests tell all the stories that we all live in one way or another. And so I do invite you guys to listen to her podcast. Liz, I thank you so much for coming into the shadow box and being transparent and being vulnerable and just sharing your story with us, to give us another perspective of what grief is. And I think everything that you've done with it and who you've become with it is beautiful. So I thank you again.
I thank you for the opportunity. I think it's beautiful what you're doing here as well.
Thank you. So, everyone, thank you for coming into the shadow box today, and we will see you next time. Namaste.